Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast. Powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. With Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson, bringing you all the chatter that matters.
Philip, you'll be pleased to know we've got a slightly less frenetic week after last week's epic show, which covered the budget and the Court of Appeal's ruling on finance, which was quite a challenge, wasn't it?
Yeah, and this week is a little bit tighter. So you'd be glad to know that probably people still trying to listen to last week's epic one. But no, you're right. I think we did cover quite a lot last week, obviously with the commission findings from the High Court, and obviously the budget announcement as well. So yeah, a little bit tight, a little bit more focused on industry headlines this week. Although there is a little bit around those topics, but we will get onto that one later, won't we?
We will indeed, yeah. So shout-outs this week include AM Live, if you can believe it. It's coming around next Thursday, 6th of November at Birmingham's NEC. We've been sort of trailing this for a number of months, and it's suddenly upon us. I had a quick look at some of the speakers, and there's some great speakers there. I think there's something like 70 exhibitors there. There's a number of speakers, including Adrian Daly of the Finance Leasing Association. I think that's going to be a particularly interesting session, isn't it?
Yes.
So definitely head along for that, because I think the Q&As are going to be fascinating. There's a friend of the pod, Neil Adley from Judge Service. Also Alex Jones from Carbase, Adam Derbyshire, the UK boss of Hyundai, Alison Jones from Stellantis, Graham Potts from Eden Motor Group, and Jeremy Evans from Marketing Delivery. So they're just a handful of the speakers. So do check out the full list on the AM website.
Yeah, it's going to be a busy event. And another shout out this week, and it was actually last week that was the 7th anniversary for the IMDA. So the Independent Motor Dealer Association was celebrating its 7th birthday, as the membership actually passes 1,500 independent dealers. And Umesh Samani, as I mentioned last week on the podcast, because we talked about him in the finance side of the podcast, but he obviously chairs that association, and fantastic. I mean, I was involved with it right at its inception 7 years ago, as to setting it up and getting involved with why we did it. But it's grown, it's continued to find space, and it's the story in Car Dealer talks about obviously some of the work they've done to help the dealers around things like the DVLA support and after sales support, etc. So it's a great association, and they do a lot of work for those independent dealers within the sector.
Yeah, definitely. And I do remember the actual launch, which was at Edgbaston in November 2017, which was actually at a Motor Trader conference, which was one of my last gigs at Motor Trader. But it was a great launch for IMDA, and for me, it was a great opportunity to meet people like Umesh Samani and David Billsborough for the first time. And they're doing great guns, 60 partners, and as you say, 1,500 members now. So big shout out there for the IMDA.
And we will get Umesh on at some point in the future to sort of talk a little bit about what's been happening in his world, and more importantly in the world of the IMDA. So we'll keep you in touch with that. Probably 2025 now, looking at our diary for the remainder of this year, but we'll see what we can do with that one.
And we're joined later in this show, in the second half, by Stephen Whitton for his latest Men-Able moment. And this week he'll be looking at being in the present during what are uncertain times with the US election and the recent budget.
You're listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by Motors.
So here we go, Philip. Headlines this week come from Car Dealer, AM, Motor Trader and the Daily Telegraph, starting with new car registrations drop across fleet and retail in October as EV sales rise. New van market hits 3-year high in October. Hybrids and EVs take their highest share of used car market in October, reports Motors. The car finance scandal, I don't think a week's going to go by now without us covering it. But this week, we've got a fascinating piece from the Daily Telegraph, written by Swansway's Peter Smyth. So we'll take a look at some of his comments within that. Marshall Motors profits plummet in full year results. And we'll finish this week with an acquisition made by Lloyd Motor Group.
You're listening to all the chatter that matters on the Motor Trade Radio podcast. If you're a supplier and would like us to profile your business and reach our audience of dealer bosses, managers and decision makers on one of our dedicated supplier specials episodes, get in touch with Curtis and Philip at motortraderadio@yahoo.com.
So as Curtis said there, we're heading over to car dealer first, and obviously the new car registrations have been recently published for the month of October. And the headline is that BEVs enjoy a strong month of growth despite new car market falling in October. And this is obviously that the month saw a 6% slide in overall sales year on year. And this was the second time the market has fallen this year. But BEVs are the only powertrain to rise, citing increase in the overall market share. So again, lots of detail around sort of October's performance. Performance was 144,288 new car registrations compared to 153,529 in the same month of last year. But there's a lot going on again, isn't there, Curtis, with this one?
Yeah, lots of dynamics in this one. So, as you say, the market as a whole down 6%, only the second time this year. But interestingly, the decrease was across all sectors, which is pretty unusual because fleet has been performing so strongly this year. But for October, it was down 1.7%, and the smaller small business sector was down 13%. But private retail sales fell by 12%, and that's continuing a trend which has now been in place for 2 years, if you can believe that. And that actually meant that fewer than 4 in 10 new cars registered in the first 10 months have gone directly to private buyers. So showing, as I say, the strength of that fleet market, because that is where predominantly that's what's driven the market. And looking at fuel types, the fall was driven by double-digit drops in petrol and diesel, which were down 14% and 20% respectively. And with hybrids, they were down 1.6% for pure hybrids and 3.2% for plug-in hybrids. But there was some good news for EVs, wasn't there?
Yeah, they had seen a growth. I think there's obviously still a bit of a challenge around private registrations of EVs still, but we'll talk about that shortly around what's happening around that EV market. But yeah, there is that rise in EV registrations, which I suppose you can expect that with a little bit of an incentive to do so, isn't there, Curtis?
Yeah, definitely. So EVs were up, and the research found that UK new car buyers now have more than 125 different EV models to choose from, and that's actually an increase of 38% over the last 10 months. So we're certainly seeing more new EV models being introduced into the market. Most of them are being snapped up by fleet, despite some of the incentives in place for retail customers.
And sticking with the market, we've got the slight, just before we move on to the next story there, but a European performance at the minute. So you're looking at Italy in the month of October, we're down 9.1%, down to just over 126,000 registrations. Not dissimilar for France, down 11.1% to 135,500 registrations. Germany rose actually year on year by 6% to 232,000 registrations, and Spain grew as well to 83,500, and that was a rise of 7.2%. So a little bit of a mixed market there over in our European partners of what happened in the month of October.
Yeah, and heading over to AM Online, and the headline there is UK set to race past ZEV legal targets as EV sales continue to soar. And this follows on from the SMMT stats that we were just talking about. And as we were saying, EV registrations for the month were up 24%. And this particular story is based on research from New Automotive, who've drilled into the EV stats, and the findings there are that October marks the third consecutive month that EV sales have hit the 20% mark and places the car industry well above the 2024 target set by the ZEV mandate. And as I say, this is according to New Automotive. And according to its latest electric car count, EVs represent the fastest growing fuel sector of the month, accounting for, and there's a slight discrepancy here, which is quite interesting. So New Automotive say that EVs accounted for 20.8% of market share, whereas the SMMT put it slightly lower at 20.7%. But we won't quibble too much about that.
No, but I think you're right. I think this is, it's very difficult to monitor that ZEV EV performance against the ZEV mandate, if that makes sense, because we know there are other things to play in this. I think the new acronym is VETS, which incorporates both the ZEV mandate for the UK, but the broader CAFE target that the global OEMs are trying to chase from a decarbonisation perspective. So there is a lot of playing out in this one. And I think a couple of people are saying now that it's not as bad as you think. There are quite a few of the OEMs that are fairly close to achieving their standard. I suppose the big question with this is, how are they achieving it, at what cost? Because there is a lot of subvented incentives and financial support on EVs, isn't there, going into the fleet and leasing sector to make this happen.
Yeah, definitely. And we will pick up this story, I'm sure, next month. But moving on, no one this week covered the van sales, or certainly I couldn't spot any coverage of it. So what we'll do is we'll look at the SMMT's press release, and they headed it, "New van market hits 3-year high, but EVs need boost." So the number of LCVs registered in October grew by 2.4%. So it's encouraging news there, with new vans, pickups, and commercial 4x4s registered. And it represents the third consecutive month of overall growth. And October was actually, the October market was the best it had been in 3 years. And looking at where the growth came from, demand for small and medium vans were up 56% and 50% respectively. Uptake of larger vans, meanwhile, fell by 3%, though these vehicles still represent the vast majority of the market. But more positively, demand for new battery electric vans rose for the first time in 5 months. So they were actually up 62% in October, with new registrations of these new models representing 8.4% of the whole new LCV market in October. So still a long way to go, because it's been going in fits and starts, hasn't it? The uptake of electric vehicles in the van sector.
Yeah, we know that it's a more challenging market at the minute than the car market, although the target is obviously quite a bit lower. there still remains a problem and a bit of a challenge there. But there is an encouraging comment in the press release from Mike Hawes, who's the chief executive of the SMMT, that says that the continued growth in demand for new vans is encouraging, given this sector is a barometer of the health of Britain's businesses. And where they feel after the budget last week. Industry has invested huge sums delivering cutting-edge technology, including zero-emission vehicles, but low demand raises serious doubts over the ability of the UK to achieve its ambitious green targets, and that there must be an urgent review of the market, regulation and support in place, else the cost will soon be felt in reduced UK investment, economic growth, jobs and decarbonisation. I think he's summed that up quite well, hasn't he?
He has indeed, yes, yeah. So moving on, next story comes from AM, and the headline there is MG3 Hybrid emerges as fastest selling used car, finds Motors. So this is the monthly Motors market view, which I worked with the team on Motors on the press release for this. And there's some fascinating stats within this one. So as we've highlighted, the MG3 Hybrid was the fastest seller, which I think sold in something like 10 days, averaging 10 days. But I think the biggest story within this is that hybrids and EVs accounted for 14% of all used cars listings in October, marking a notable increase from just 10% a year ago. And within that, pure hybrids made up 9.6% of the stock, up from 7%, while the share of EVs actually grew from 3% to just shy of 5%.
Yeah, and I think supporting that a little bit further down, they do talk about a little bit around the age profile, and particularly focused on hybrids, saying that the age cohort of 2 to 5 years saw a 24% increase, suggesting that buyers are more than willing to consider slightly older models as they seek to balance price with their eco credentials. So sort of highlighting that there is demand there is this move in terms of that new energy vehicle, because as these vehicles are a better price proposition for them, and giving them that hybrid technology, it looks like there is a demand for that in the used vehicle market. But they do say that despite the rise in hybrids and EVs, petrol vehicles continue to dominate the used car market, representing over half, 54%, of the listings on Motors at the minute there. So still, not a lot of mention of diesel in this one, Curtis, but very much that petrol.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned pricing overall. In terms of pricing, the average cost of a used car in October was actually up 2% to £17,899. Although it's worth adding a bit of context there, because the figure remains pretty close to the average price recorded 12 months ago when it was 17,923. And this modest increase in price pretty much indicates the market remains stable despite fluctuations in supply and demand, which is certainly something we talk about on a monthly basis with CAP HPI's Darren Martin.
It is, yeah. And just finally, there's a comment in here from Lucy Tugby, who's the marketing director at Motors, saying that overall October's used car market proved to be relatively stable despite some of the consumer uncertainty in the run-up to the autumn budget. Although prices trended upwards, they remained on a par with last October, with healthy demand, seeing dealers achieving faster sales than they have for the last 2 months. But we were back after the break with more headlines following this week's Menable Moment.
You're listening to all the chatter that matters on Motor Trade Radio, powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. This is your weekly one-stop shop for all the biggest car retailing headlines from across the media, available on demand, wherever you are, and on your podcast feed. Next up is our latest Menable Moment, looking at mental wealth and well-being awareness and best practice in the automotive sector, with me, Stephen Whitton. Yeah, hi everyone, it's Men Able Moments time again. Hope you're well. What a funny couple of weeks it's been. We've had the budget in the UK, and of course now we've had the US election. And both of those things, for very different reasons, I'm sure will have created in their own way a level of uncertainty. And with that comes some anxiety, quite possibly, but also more so the latter. The election may have just, for some, brought an air of optimism as well. I don't know. I'm not going to take a stand on any of those subjects, just to put out there that these are the uncontrollable things that happen in the world that can have an effect on the way we perceive what's going on and how we feel. I've mentioned before that for me, if I dwell on the past, it brings up some triggers that can be quite depressing, and therefore I can get depressed. I don't do it at all anymore. Used to quite a bit, but not anymore. And if I dwell on the future, it's very easy to think about what might happen and then catastrophize and create all kinds of scenarios in your mind about what might affect me personally. So the only cure that I've found for not dwelling on the past and not catastrophizing and spending time worrying about the future, the only cure is to be totally 100% present in the moment, in the now, and living day by day. Now, I know that might sound a bit like a sort of dismissive kind of strategy, and it's not actually. It's about creating a mental wealth resilience that enables you to pretty much deal with anything that comes your way. And the reason for that is because you're no longer catastrophizing about the future, but you are realistically, in your mind at least, planning for what might happen. Now, I know that listening to this, there'll be people at all different levels with that, and some might find it easier, some might need a bit of help and support. And that's where a collective mental wealth philosophy, culture, or approach comes into play. Now, I attended a book launch last week of a fabulous friend of mine, Amy Rowlinson, who has just launched her book called Focus on Why. Not about the why, but focusing on why as a distinction between purpose and goals and objectives and all of that stuff. Absolutely brilliant. And in there, she uses a phrase which I'm totally going to use from now on, which is to challenge the past, embrace the present, and shape the future. And I thought, wow, doesn't that just sum up exactly what I've just said, which is about confronting things that happened in your past. You can't do anything about that. It's done. But also embracing the moment and the day and living life in the now and doing your part in the bits that you can control and what you can do something about to shape the future. Lots of uncontrollables in there, things like the outcome of the budget or foreign elections or whatever it might be. All of those things are uncontrollable. So if you're allowing those things to add to any catastrophizing or anxiety for the future, that's going to impede your opportunity to shape what the future looks like. So, a few things in there to think about. The one final thought that I'm going to leave you with that Amy's book really brought home for me was the idea of being a great ancestor. And I sent her a little message a couple of days after the book launch, and I said that I was having a bit of a reflective moment and told her what I was thinking. And she came back and she said that I'd always struck her as somebody who leads with the following three words: courage, freedom, and authenticity. And I've got to say, it's not always been like that. And I do hope it continues like that. But in order to be courageous, and many of you know that, I put these messages out there and I'm working with organisations to help leaders be more courageous in the conversations they're having about well-being and about mental wealth and so on. But in order to do that, you have to have a fair amount of mental wealth yourself and be
okay with not being okay and all that stuff. Freedom, of course, is about being free to not just say what you think, but to make a stand and be who you are. And then finally, authenticity. And that's the unapologetically you bit. That, just be you and stop apologising for things that you may have tried to cover up about yourself or not declare to the world or whatever it might be, and just be authentic. So, probably going to spend more time talking about those things over coming Menable moments, but for now, just wanted to help each other out there. It's a tough world, and we know that things, aren't necessarily getting any easier. And of course, we've got the autumn and the winter now. So help each other out. We've got the mental wealth to do this, and just keep an eye and an ear on people. If you need any help with any of that, you know how to get hold of me, Stephen Stephen.Whitton@menable.org, or through LinkedIn or through the website. Many thanks and have a great weekend.
Well, very succinctly put by Steve Whitton, as ever. Certainly a number of things to ponder there, because it has been a pretty momentous week this week, and a lot of uncertainty, certainly over the last couple of weeks, as Stephen outlined with the budget as well. And as we always say, if you want to contact Steve, do look. And as we always say, if you want to contact Steve, you can find him at menable.org, which is online, or you can email him directly at stephen.whitton@menable.org, and that's Stephen with a PH, and he's on LinkedIn as well.
He's just a little bit there. But, going over now to motortrader.com, and still on the story of EVs. This is a slightly different story, that using the data from the SMMT, saying used EV sales skyrocket as sustainable market gains momentum. And this is saying that the used car market grew by 4.3% between the months of July and September, making the seventh successive quarter of year-on-year growth, according to the SMMT. And that around 1.9 million vehicles changed hands, with 81,000 of those vehicles additional transactions compared to the same period of 2023 there. So a little bit of optimism there from the SMMT, talking about that uptake of used EVs.
Yeah, it's a big increase, because it's a 57% year-on-year increase, and it's a record of 53,500 used BEVs sold. But the context is there that it was from a very sort of low base 12 months ago. But it's reflecting the largest ever market share that used EVs have had, at 2.7%, up from 1.8%. 12 months ago, and also sales of plug-in hybrids and hybrids also rose up 29% and 35.8% respectively.
Now, moving over to a slightly different topic, we're going over to the Telegraph now, and as Curtis alluded to in the summary of this week's headlines, Peter Smyth, who many of you would know as one of the directors at the Swansway, was in the Telegraph at the weekend, and obviously talking around the High Court ruling around Finance Commission and the Transparency Declaration of Finance Commission that sort of upset the market a week last Friday. The headline is that the car finance scandal will be the death of dealerships like mine. We're stuffed. A shock ruling from the Court of Appeal on commission paid to car salesmen has caused chaos on forecourts. Now, he does go on to a little bit more sort of context around this, saying, that if he's at let's say, a dinner party, and he talks about that, and saying that, when he talks about what he does, it's a sort of negative response to that. But this landmark ruling is potentially set to sort of change the landscape from a revenue earnings perspective for dealers right across the board, as well as the way vehicle lending is processed between the lender and the customer.
Yeah, it's a very forthright piece, as you'd expect from Peter, and it's very much first person. I'm assuming it's an interview he did, but it's all attributed to him. And within the piece, he says, ordinary Britons probably don't know, but we need these finance commissions to survive. Without it, the fact of the matter is every dealer group in this country, both large and small, does not have a viable business. We're stuffed. And he goes on to say that the motor trade has incredibly tight margins when it comes to selling cars, and finance deals make up a huge percentage of that. Without the commission, many will likely go under. So he's really highlighting the impact that this ruling has had on fellow dealers.
Yeah, no, and this is the thing. I mean, it's a very difficult one to broad brush, because it's treated very much differently from business to business and how they operate. But clearly those good operators that treat it correctly and fairly to the consumer, they are obviously being associated with some of the ones that may not be doing it as transparently, as fairly as some others. But his point is there. Over the decades, finance commission has become quite heavily reliant on the balance sheet for many retailers, because the pricing of cars has become that tight, that competitive, that it does make a good percentage markup of their revenue to allow them to operate and stay in business. And we must never forget. I mean, the return on sales for franchise dealers in the UK isn't great. I mean, when you start talking about 1, 2, 3, 4% return on sales, it's not a big return compared to other sectors. So I think it's going to be a difficult one that the retailers are going to need to try and navigate through on this one.
Yeah, and he does actually call out lenders in this piece by articulating that now would not be a good time for them to start thinking about cutting the actual commissions they pay dealers. So he clearly wants this resolved, and he makes it quite clear that as a business, they're more than happy to talk about the commission that they're generating to customers. And he says, customers are aware of it and they do kind of almost expect it. So, it's not a major hurdle to overcome, but it needs to be resolved quickly.
It does, yeah. And finally, a couple of financial group and acquisition updates. That firstly over to car dealer. Marshall's Motor Group sees profits plummet in latest set of accounts, saying that accounts for Constellation on dealer group reveal big drop in profit for 2024. Revenue drops slightly too, as 21 dealerships are jettisoned to other parties. There was obviously quite a few sell-offs of some of their businesses through that financial period, and saying that, but despite drop, shareholders still take a 25 million dividend from the business. And this is the profit before tax for the year ending of March the 31st of this year, 2024, came in at 16.4 million, and that was down 42.9 million the year before. So, significant drop there from 42.9 million to 16.4 for the year ending.
Yeah, and a lot of it's attributed to those used car margins that we've already covered. Revenue was broadly similar year on year at £3.6 billion, down from £3.7 billion in 2023. And worth pointing out, this is to the year ending 31st of March 2024. But despite the falls, Marshall still declared £25 million worth of dividends to its shareholders. And the piece goes on to outline how Marshall now operates 141 dealerships. It actually, this surprised me because it's something that we did cover over the course of the year. But within that 12-month period, the Marshall accounts show the group sold 21 dealerships during the period. That included 19 Toyota and Lexus franchises, which were split between Stephen Eagle, FRF, and Lister's Group, which completed in June last year. So obviously an eventful year there for Marshalls.
Yeah, definitely, and it'll be interesting when we get the financial trade in for the year ending March 2025, accounting for this year. So one that we'll keep an eye on. And the final story for this week, and staying with car dealer, Lloyd Motor Group continues expansion in North with Stratstone, Tyneside, BMW and Mini buyout. Now, I spend a lot of time with Lloyd's, and great family run business is the Lloyd's Motor Group. Stratstone site renamed Lloyd's North, Tyneside, BMW and Mini after the buyout expands Lloyd's operations in the north of England, and this completes a busy 12 months of new openings for the family run business. So this is a great sort of demonstration of expanding that relationship between the Lloyd's Motor Group and BMW Mini, because it's additional to other franchise sites that they've already got with them.
Yeah, definitely. And it is an interesting group, as you say, that they operate across the north of England. In fact, I think they're even north of you, Philip.
Yeah, kind of, yeah, a little bit, yeah.
So north of England and into the Scottish borders, representing BMW, Mini, Jaguar, Land Rover, Volvo, Kia and Volkswagen. So a good spread of franchises there. And the latest purchase completes what's been a busy 12 months for the company. It's doubled its presence in the northeast with the acquisition of a Stratstone site in Tyneside and the launch of Lloyd's Select Newcastle, Lloyd's flagship used car operation in the city. And these businesses join Lloyd's Newcastle, BMW and Mini and Newcastle body shop operations in the city. So really is sort of building and consolidating there.
Yeah, so that's it for this week. So as always, we'll keep it fairly tight and short for you this week, because we know last week was a bit of a marathon for you. As always, these headlines will be shared on the newsletter through the LinkedIn newsletter feed for Motor Trade Radio podcast, with all the links to all the headlines that you can go into a little bit more detail. Certainly look at some of those new car registrations, because some great graphics supporting some of those early press releases around the new car market, and have a look at the Telegraph one as well in a little bit more detail, because it is very much in the words of Peter Smyth and saying it as it is to it's getting it across to the consumer as Peter does.
But that's all for now. So many thanks for joining us on the Motor Trade Radio podcast. Until next week, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.
Thank you for listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. We'll be sharing all the URLs from this week's headlines on Monday morning. To make sure you receive them, just subscribe to the free newsletter on our LinkedIn page. Just search Motor Trade Radio Podcast.